Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 25th, 2021. Time for another show, time for another week. And, we've switched over from, I guess, Trump timekeeping to Biden timekeeping at this point. And, it was a relatively quiet weekend this time, wasn't it? It really did make a difference, and I think a lot of people are noticing. I guess this settles at least some part, anyway, of the deplatforming debate in terms of what to do with our most annoying, most nettlesome social trolls. Now, that was a description of the person who had just previously served as president of the United States, allegedly. And I don't know. I don't know if anybody really thought we were ever going to come to this until, of course, he began running for president, and then I guess we could all see it coming. But for many years, we've been debating whether or not we're better off deplatforming the trolls who interrupt our lives, whether it be Milo Yiannopoulos, who also has pretty much disappeared from the social radar, or any of the other nuts all the way up to Donald Trump. And it took some convincing, but eventually Twitter saw the wisdom of getting rid of him on their platform. This is something, of course, lots of people would be very happy to remind you that Kamala Harris called for a year and a half, 2 years ago, perhaps at this point, right at the outset of her presidential bid. I don't know, maybe it was some months into it, I'm not sure. But at any rate, it was a pretty good idea. And Twitter was pretty sure, for various reasons, I'm sure not excluding the profits they were making or the high profile that they got as the platform of choice for the person who was at least pretending to be president of the United States. But they did eventually see the danger in keeping him around and closed the account down. And it helped keep things relatively peaceful in Washington, D.C., after the attack on the Capitol, of course, minus that little thing. I'm sure a lot played into that, but I think it had a lot to do with keeping things calm and erasing his ability to make a generalized call for people to come back to the Capitol or to assemble in their state capitals. There were other avenues available for people to do that, but the enthusiasm for it, for some reason, just sort of disappeared.
Enthusiasms.
Right, enthusiasms. And that, I think, had a lot to do with it. And it's been psychologically a lot different to be engaged in social media or getting your news through social media and not have his voice there being amplified all the time. I think it had a much greater effect than even the people who were pushing for deplatforming him for a long time anticipated. And, of course, it coinciding with the end of his term didn't hurt either. But anyway, I think, generally speaking, a great success in that area. Anyway, lots of other things to catch up on. People who are still on social media, still doing lots of things, also should, I don't think my dad is an active listener to the show, at least not live. I'm not certain about it. He doesn't say as much about it as others do, but maybe from time to time he chimes in or listens in, and it's his birthday today, so happy birthday to him. I think he's probably got other things on his mind at the moment, but that's in the back of my mind. I'll be speaking to him later in the afternoon and catch up on anything I haven't already broadcast today. He's probably up on the news, so let's get to it, shall we? Bill knows the show has started up in Portland, Maine, or at least he was just guessing that we would actually show up. That's really the way the place works. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. He's correct about that. Good guess. Today, me, Kagro X, David Waldman, has the unpleasant task, of informing you that President Biden has spent 0 days golfing at one of his resorts. That's true. There's no resorts, but Biden owns nothing in my town. I don't have to deal with that ever again. I wonder if Trump will ever return to this golf course for any reason. Maybe, I guess, if he shows up mount a defense in his impeachment trial. I suppose he could try to get in around, but it's pretty cold up here, and I don't know if it's playing weather. So yeah, I don't know when he'll come back to Washington, if ever. Anyway, President Biden has spent 0 days golfing at one of his resorts, and also 0 lies in the first 5 days. And he calls himself a leader. I don't know. It's going to take some getting used to this style of leadership. I don't even think that the other side has accused him of lying yet at this point. They have all sorts of other things to lay at his doorstep. I've even begun to see people in my Twitter threads about the COVID-19 statistics begin to try to lay this at Biden's feet. This is Biden's fault. That guy dying, or whatever, that guy died while Biden was president. It's his fault. Of course, reminder, once again, I think we discussed it last week, for the next, I don't know, still 3 to 5 weeks, I imagine everybody who's going to be added to the statistics, at least in terms of deaths anyway, can pretty much still say they at least contracted the disease on Trump's watch. And there's probably still a few people whose tests will turn up positive for the next week or so who can still point back to that time. But we'll see how it goes from there. At that point, then I guess we have to, I suppose you would have to chalk it up to or at least having the disease contracted under the Biden administration, but I'm not certain we can blame him for the same level of infection and transmission anytime soon. All right, well, Greg Dworkin is here and vacuuming, I assume, so let's we'll catch up on what's going on and what rooms are being cleaned and how things are going. Oh, okay.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I hear all sorts. Don't worry about it. I think at some point my dishwasher will probably chime in the background too.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
These things happen. It's home studios.
It's I'm feeling rather philosophical today.
Oh, okay.
And, a lot of it has to do with, as you pointed out, Trump is no longer on Twitter, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. And, it's really nice to not have that, every moment. And it does get amplified because what happens is he says something on Twitter, and for reasons that are obscure, all the cable companies seem obligated to say, oh, did you just see what's on Twitter, even if you never saw it.
Sure.
So it was an extremely loud amplification that's now no longer there, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. But we're still left with a broken Republican Party.
Yes.
And that is a very big deal. A couple of things on that. I think one of the problems that we had, of course, in the last 4 years is a loathing of the media's approach to Trump, which is exactly that, to amplify everything that he says. But it's clear that just like Republicans who suddenly found that they couldn't stand the Trump administration in the last 36 minutes before he left, the media has decided that, without his amplification and even with it, maybe that insurrection was a little bit too far. And maybe we'll start covering Trump the way we should have covered him the last 4 years. We'll use lies when he's lying. We'll say it's false when it's false. Mm-hmm. We won't pretend that, this is the pivot that now he's become president nonsense. That's gone. We'll never do that again. In fact, there's stories, for example, in Politico today about how Trump's minions that decided not to leave after January 6th suddenly are having trouble finding a job in corporate America. That's all wonderful. It's nice to see all of that covered. But what we're learning is that it's, certainly nice and good and appropriate and healthy that the media covers Trump the way they need to cover him. But it's not really the media. The problem is the Republican Party and the conservatives and the deplorables in the country who wind up supporting him. And Hillary Clinton, of course, was absolutely right about that. It's about half of the Republican Party. Yes. So half of them really are deplorable. They, if you mention things like white supremacism, they get all upset and say, you're talking about me, how dare you, even though their name was never mentioned. And that's true from Josh Hawley to Rand Paul to, your average everyday QAnon supporter. And, that's really the issue. And it's very difficult to fix that when, in fact, the problem is the electorate, the constituency, not the majority of the country. It's about a quarter of the country. But that's enough to influence Republicans because they run for office and they're worried about primaries. And that is the driving force behind why it's likely that Trump will skate on conviction when his trial comes up next week. Because they don't really care about right or wrong. That's not their problem. It's never been their problem. First of all, again, half of the senators, Republican senators, are in fact deplorables themselves, like Ted Cruz
at this point,
and Josh Hawley, and they're perfectly happy to throw away democracy if it means clinging to power. And the other half are afraid of the first half. You know, and so they're going to vote the way their constituents want, they think, because they really don't have any guts, and they could care less about whether or not it's appropriate to convict him. You know, these aren't grand strategic thoughts on their part. It's, am I going to get primaried? It's really that and nothing else, because senators are in fact really small people with really small interests. You can see that in Marco Rubio, the smallest of them. And I don't mean physical size.
True.
Marco Rubio, is complaining about cancel culture and how the Democrats are just making it impossible to unite. And by the way, he's going to filibuster the organizing resolution, and he's going to filibuster anything that Biden tries to do. And why can't we have unity?
Yes.
And as other people have pointed out, it's just interesting because this unity thing has, again, two deep philosophical reasons. Reason number one, like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, is we want unity because you don't want to look at us. Right. He'll find that we were responsible. And reason number two is that in this context, unity means unity of the white race. Do not push any of our Nazis and white supremacists out of our party. We need unity because without them, we cannot win.
Oh, well, I hadn't thought about unity in that sense, but okay.
So, you got to unite. It's perfectly appropriate. It's time to unite. It's time to unite against Democrats.
Well, wasn't that what they called their Charlottesville March, right? Unite the right.
Exactly right. And so, don't forget that, because that's the driving principle behind this whole unite thing.
Okay. Well, yeah, we've had difficulty defining exactly what that means in this moment, but I guess we should have known for a long time.
Right, and that's why not unity, but accountability is the important response, and of course that's what Democrats are taking. So here's some from the media stuff. This is Matt McDermott. In the past day, multiple state Republican parties have taken to Twitter to embrace QAnon, in case you were wondering how their party rebuilding efforts are going.
That's right.
We have, for example, not just Sarah Sanders saying she's going to run for governor of Arkansas because she has no qualifications, but, she used to work for Trump. We have Kelly Ward, who was reelected chair in Arizona.
Right. And
Kelly Ward, gives Alan West in Texas a run for his money in terms of being nuttiest party chair. But, party chairs all over the country are endorsing the idea that QAnon is correct, and that's really the direction they need to go. And so not only was Kelly Ward elected, but their party decided by an even bigger margin, because it was a fairly close election, since Kelly Ward has lost every race that she's been responsible for and threatens to do so in the future. But they're censoring Doug Ducey, the governor, Republican governor, and Cindy McCain, figures like that, because, for example, with Ducey, he dared to put in COVID restrictions.
Oh, yes. Oh, I thought it was because he certified the vote results. So that's probably
no. The actual reason they censured him was because he was pushing against all constitutional and personal liberty principles. He wanted people to, try to survive,
stay alive. Right? Yeah. Arizona is in particularly bad shape in terms of its COVID infections, its death rates.
Right. Now things are getting better around the country, but this is Arizona saying, New Hampshire has a license plate that says "Live Free or Die," and Arizona's going to do them one better and just have a license plate that says "Just die"
and do it quick.
And do it quick.
Yeah.
Really,
well, what's his name was
cost
right the whole
taxpayers
time.
a lot less if you do it fast.
Yeah. And now his name already escapes me. It's been too many years and too many people in and out of the the picture. But who was it? The Democratic representative from Florida who pinpointed it early that the Republican position on health care was die and do it quickly and get it over with already.
Yeah, that was during the healthcare debate.
Yeah.
Right?
Name will come to me
So,
in the middle of
Hawaii
your
GOP, we should make it abundantly clear, they tweet, the people who subscribe to the Q fiction were largely motivated by a sincere and deep love for America, patriotism, and love of country should never be ridiculed.
Yeah.
Op-ed edition.
Sure. I always listen to the Hawaii Republican Party, by the way. Tremendously successful outfit.
Yeah, well.
And it was Alan Grayson I was thinking.
Thank you for that.
Right.
It's a bad state of affairs, and one cannot be unaware of it. Now, this is a piece written in The Atlantic by Hans Noel, Associate Professor of Government at Georgetown University. In other words, an academic political scientist. You may know him better as being one of the co-authors of The Party Decides. So he knows his stuff. Okay. And he's got a report here. Republicans can agree to disagree over democracy. The post-Trump GOP is far more likely to put its differences aside than to split. Less than 6 hours after rioters forced legislators to stop their debate over certifying the electors in Arizona on January 6th, senators are back on the floor again. The insurrection failed to stop Congress from playing its constitutional role in certifying Biden as the next president. And that may be a metaphor of the resilience of American institutions under assault, but the Senate's quick return to business also shows that the anti-democratic attitudes of the protesters were nothing new to the chamber. Mm-hmm. Indeed, the debate over whether to accept the outcome of a presidential election was only happening at the Capitol because a faction of the Republican Party had already embraced the same grievances as the rioters.
Yes.
So the people inside are the people outside, and the people outside are the people inside. And that's embodied, of course, by Josh Hawley. But, you'll see it in terms of how they vote on impeachment conviction.
Okay. Yeah.
In Atlantic, Tom Nichols dubbed this faction of lawmakers the Sedition Caucus. Yes. It lost on January 6th, but its members are not going away. The question is what form that persistence will take. Then he goes on to talk about two different ways the Republican Party can split, neither of which is going to happen. Mm-hmm. Issue one or path number one that won't happen is Trump will form a new Patriot Party. And we know that's not happening because he doesn't have the wherewithal to organize. And at the same time, he's threatening to raise money to primary whoever opposed him.
Right.
And the second path that won't happen is the moderates like Lisa Murkowski and Mitt Romney leave the party, leaving it to the QAnon people who are already there. And they've already said they're not doing that. So neither one is going to happen, and we're going to be stuck with this Republican Party for a while. And so the only way to take care of them is to beat them at the ballot box.
I guess so.
Not with a hammer, but at the ballot box.
Yeah, I mean, can you do it with a hammer at the ballot box?
Extinguisher, that's their trade, Mark. But they're basically brown shirts, and you have to beat them at the ballot box because it's the only way. The other way, of course, is to beat them in the courts. Yes. And so the opening of Trump to legal action as of now is a wonderful thing. As a matter of fact, to give you a sample of how this is going to go, you start low and go high, right? You pick off the little people and then you move up. Dominion Voting Systems sues Rudy Giuliani over false election claims and seeks $1.3 billion. Oh. The complaint outlines evidence of Giuliani's false claims about how Dominion allegedly fixed the election. Good. Do him, then do Trump.
Yeah. I mean, I'm for that. Neither of them will be able to come up with the money to pay that judgment. That's not what they're after.
That's the idea of it, isn't it?
Right. All right. I thought that was good news. And Giuliani on the hook. That's going to bother him quite a bit. And it looks like a pretty solid
he'll be
complaint,
sweating black bullets.
I guess so. And
this time it won't be hair dye.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I don't know what it will be at that point, but he may end up sweating brown ones. I don't know. He's in real trouble.
Red ones, whatever. He's in trouble. Maybe he can negotiate it so it's a balloon payment in 10 years.
Oh, yes. Well, that's possible. I'm sure he'll make a great deal, and he's a great lawyer. I don't know who he's going to get to represent him.
Sidney Powell. Well, she's being sued by Dominion as well. But hey, what the heck? Usual principles don't apply here. Normally, ethical people would recuse themselves, but not this bunch.
It'll be real interesting to see what he does with it. And the complaint seems to be pretty solid, and making the very good point that, Rudy Giuliani never dared to make his accusations against Dominion in court, where somebody could, actually hold him to account directly right on the spot for it. He made sure to do it in social media instead, but that amounts to a targeted harassment campaign, and that's what the suit is about.
Right. So let's look at this big picture here with that kind of attitude. This is a Twitter thread by Lyman Stone, who's a conservative lawyer. And he says, conservatives love to complain about the media, but there's an inside baseball media that reveals how destructive the conservative media criticism environment can be to the conservative movement. For example, Fox News.
Okay.
Now, you may have heard this, but 2 Fox News political executives are out after correctly calling Arizona for Biden.
Oh, yes,
and I think we talked on the show last week about how enormous it was that Fox called Arizona for Biden because it spoiled Trump's coup plans.
Yeah, and it was right.
And it was right. And the guy who actually made the call, the decision desk guy, is still there.
Oh.
But the news executives associated with the decision desk who are more visible are out.
I see.
And he says the story is pretty simple. This is Lyman Stone speaking. On election night, Fox News called Arizona very early. This surprised pretty much everybody. The Fox News team had improved their election model in 2020 and was confident their call was correct, even if unconventional. Controversially, however, they called it for Biden.
Yes.
Arizona's historically been a red state. The polls and final result were close. Nobody had a really strong expectation it was going to go for Biden until Fox News just called it. Yeah. Now, this hurled Trump surrogates into a desperate place. If they lost Arizona, that was a bad sign for the night. More importantly, it happened before midnight. It humiliated the president while millions were still watching. I remember that night. It was terrific.
Yeah.
That's me speaking. The Trump campaign immediately turned on a dime. They pivoted from, look, we're crushing it with Hispanics, massive turnout, incredible performance, to the election was stolen. Now, who stole the election changed over time. It was Fox News, some rando in Atlanta, poll workers, China,
Italy, I think, too, yeah. Italians and their satellites.
Yeah, right, somehow. Exactly. The conspiratorial delusion of the stolen election grew, and that, of course, is the big lie, I'm me adding now, that Fox News is still responsible for, and it's why we have so much disruption in this country, and those who tell the big lie are directly responsible for the January 6th insurrection. But he says the conspiratorial delusion grew. Its rageful trigger came in that innocuous decision to call Arizona early. For Trump supporters, that call changed the night. It was the turning point. It was somehow deeply significant. So this week, Fox News fired all the people involved in that decision.
Okay, so we're still your network.
Now, because they're competing with OANN and Newsmax. Now, let's look at this story from another angle. And that's why they're trying a whole bunch of nutcases in the 7 p.m. slot to see if they can get some more viewership. There was less true uncertainty about who would win at 11:20 p.m. on election night than in any election ever, because so many votes had been cast early. And while counts of these votes were not announced, early indicators based on turnout by voter registration and polls of who showed up, all the stuff we were analyzing, as well as differences in pre-election rhetoric, strongly suggest that early voters would swing for Biden. And we all knew that. And the question was going to be how many people showed up on Election Day.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, for all that people like to crap on polling, the reality is the predictive models for election are really getting pretty good. They're imperfect, of course, but they're improving all the time. And as a result, Fox News' team was very well positioned to have a good idea what a Trump win would need to look like in terms of how day of results were going to need to look for Trump to offset the likely split in early and absentee votes. So from this perspective, Fox News' call was a triumph of good analysis. They correctly called the close race, even though a number of votes still not counted massively exceeded the expected margin of victory. Analysts in finance get paid lots of money for that kind of call.
Yeah, that's true.
Having a rational, explainable, reproducible model which produces correct out-of-the-money calls is an extremely valuable thing. As a professional forecaster in a different business, this is an exciting and valuable tool to see in a model.
Yeah,
unfortunately, the model's call was politically inconvenient.
That's Robert Mercer's biggest business model, is it?
Exactly.
To that.
What? You're taking my model and using it, and it turns out I don't like the call, you're fired. Trump's team was counting on night of calls swinging their way in order to make similar arguments as was made in 2000, inject enough uncertainty into the public discourse, and they hoped to influence the outcome. In other words, they had already pre-planned a Brooks Brothers riot.
Yes.
Except this time it wasn't Brooks Brothers, and so Trump was really disappointed because they didn't dress the part.
Yeah,
so
Duluth
the Trump
Trading
team
Company
and Trump supporters
overalls.
around the nation threw a tantrum. And ultimately what happened was, 1, Fox News recruited high-quality analytic talent into the conservative movement. 2, the talent delivered, providing accurate results faster than competitors. 3, the results didn't fit the narrative. 4, fired.
Okay.
Conservatives justifiably complain about mainstream media biases because they're real and influential, this conservative is writing. But our media critics really need to pay attention to stuff like this because it's open hostility on even irrelevant truth claims. And because guess what? It didn't matter what Fox called. The results weren't influenced by it. But in the media and commentary-addicted mind of politics overdosed Trump supporters, it mattered what the media, capital letters, said. It was deeply significant, scare quotes, to these folks that their false view of the world was not publicly ratified and legitimized, even though the view was false. It was more important to these folks that the call made fit their narrative than it was true and honest. Now look, he says, a few years back, I was looking for funding for a project. I approached a funder for it. It was a data-intensive project, but with outcomes likely to be friendly to conservatives. And the funder was conservative. And the funder said, wow, this is interesting, but we don't fund data stuff. We're more interested in commentary.
Okay.
You want to repackage your stuff as op-eds? Generally, I find that conservative publications are often confused when you ask, so should I format my graphs? Because they're just totally unused to quantitative arguments being made in articles.
That is
problem
interesting.
in the conservative media system is the only expertise that gets respected is legalese. That's why Don Bongino, or whatever his name is like on all the time.
I guess.
He doesn't know anything about anything, but he says it loudly and firmly, and so that's what really matters.
That I certainly recognize, and we've seen that before, and I think you see it in a lot of the newly elected QAnon-related Republicans. If they can say the large-sounding words correctly, they sound like they know what they're talking about for all their base knows. All right.
So after the break, we'll talk about Biden.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. We continue on. Craig Dworkin is with us. I think we've rounded up our Republicans. That was the plan for segment one.
Right, and second segment is Democrats. So here's our transition story.
Guys. Okay.
One of the New York Times' excellent reporters is a fellow named Alex Burns. Now, just as an aside, people really get mad at management at the New York Times. Editors, publishers, with good reason. They suck. But some of the reporters are excellent. So, don't take it out on the reporters because management sucks. These are the working guys. So this is Alex Burns, how Democrats plan for doomsday. A huge coalition of activist groups have been working together since the spring to make sure that Joe Biden won and that the election stayed won amid Donald Trump's subterfuge. In other words, not only was Donald Trump planning for months to steal the election, Democrats were planning for months to stop him.
Good.
This was an open secret. And so the idea that, it's terrible that you would say Donald Trump would do this on purpose, that he would try to steal things that he stole. No, everybody knew. They knew to the point that people were organizing against it for months before it even happened. And, of course, Florida 2000 is part of the reason why. Now, this is Alex Burns speaking. The video call was announced on short notice, but more than 900 people quickly joined a coalition of union officials and racial justice organizers, civil rights lawyers, and campaign strategists pulled together in a matter of hours after the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill They convened to craft a plan for answering the onslaught on American democracy, and they soon reached a few key decisions. They'd stay off the streets for the moment. They'd hold back from mass demonstrations that could be exposed to an armed mob goaded on by Trump. This is after the January 6th problem.
Oh, yes.
They'd use careful language. In a presentation, Anat Shenker-Osario, a liberal messaging guru, urged against calling the attack a coup. Remember, it was an auto-gulp or an insurrection. That's the words we used. Warning that the word could make Trump sound far stronger than he was, or even imply pro-Trump militia had seized power, and they would demand stern punishment for Mr. Trump and his party. Republicans at every level of government who incited the mob must be removed or resign, read one version of the group's intended message. This was obtained and reviewed by the New York Times. The meeting was no lucky feat of emergency organizing, nor was the highly disciplined and united front that emerged from it. Instead, it was a climactic event in a long season of planning and coordination by progressives aimed largely at a challenge with no American precedent by a American president, I would add, defending the outcome of a free election from a president bent on overturning it. By the time rioters ransacked the Capitol, machinery of the left was ready, prepared by months spent sketching out doomsday scenarios and mapping out responses by countless hours of training exercises and reams of opinion research. Now, you will recall, of course, there were multiple articles about how you're going to get Trump out of the White House if he refuses to leave. That was all part of this.
Yeah,
it was all part of the same kind of concept here. We're not just going to assume that he'll concede and leave. We know who he is. Let's plan for, what if he doesn't?
Sure. You had to.
So progressive groups reckoned with their own vulnerabilities, the impulses toward fiery rhetoric and divisive demands, which generated polarizing slogans like abolish ICE and defund the police, which we've discussed on the show, by the way, ad infinitum, were supplanted by more studied vocabulary developed through nightly opinion research and message testing. Those of you who decry message testing have to remember that when it works, it's really powerful. That's why Frank Luntz has a job, and that's why these folks did what they did.
Right.
Okay. Since the violence of January 6th, progressive leaders have not deployed large-scale public protests at all. Interviews with nearly 24 leaders involved in the effort and previously unreported degree of collaboration among progressive groups that often struggle to work so closely together because of competition over political turf, funding, and conflicting ideologic priorities. Shorthand for that, of course, is Dems in disarray, TMTM.
Right, sure.
For the organizers of the effort, and we already did copyright versus TM. We don't have to do that again.
Right.
For the organizers of the effort, it represents both a good news story, Mr. Trump was thwarted, and an ominous sign that such exhaustive efforts were required to protect election results that were not all that close.
Yes.
A reminder, it wasn't that close.
Yes. For all
So it's a great story about how people got together, put their differences aside, decided to work together for the common good, and they did it on behalf of the Biden administration, America, and the concept of democracy. And one of them said, Nalini Stamp, a top official with the Working Families Party, said her organization had been in touch with bail funds that could be activated in response to mass arrests, and their thinking had been informed by the immense protests after the killing of George Floyd. We prepare for the worst of the worst. We're going to get shot at, killed on Election Day, and afterward, you have to understand, a lot of this is coming from movements that have been dealing with a lot of death.
Yeah.
So they took it seriously, and they were prepared. And, that preparation really helped because Trump, of course, screwed up. He lost. He went too far. He wound up, I'm not just talking about the January 6th stuff, but he tried to pressure Brad Raffensperger, who had tape of it.
Well, it's really all the same.
He tried to pressure the news story, the Justice Department, by threatening to fire acting Director Rosen and replace him with a hack who was willing to take his case to the Supreme Court, modeled on what Texas did. I mean, all this ridiculous stuff that they were ready to do. And the only reason that didn't happen is that everybody else in DOJ threatened to resign en masse.
Yeah.
And the purpose of that would be to get the headlines and make it about that rather than what Trump was doing.
Yes.
Okay. And so, it's a fascinating picture into how things played out. And that kind of organizing won Biden the election. That kind of organizing is going to win the post-election, which we're still in the middle of.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting angle on it, too. not immediately apparent, but in hindsight, we now recognize all the elements of it and say, yeah, it was interesting that there wasn't an immediate movement to the streets, because I think probably if you asked people who weren't involved in the organizing ahead of time, or maybe even people who were involved in the organizing, if you didn't know exactly how things were going to play out, it's one of several options that there could be this violent uprising on the 6th. But absent knowledge that was going to happen, I think a lot of people figured, oh yeah, the only real response is massive resistance in the streets. And good thing that they had charted this out and had different responses available, because I guess I assume that the decision they made is the correct one, even if it doesn't result in an impeachment conviction per se, but at least we're there.
Right, exactly. And of course, the impeachment conviction may not come, but the outlining of why it should happen,
yes, and why we're
is at least as important
trial
as the actual results, which we know are going to be influenced by politics. Now, if you're going to look at the most egalitarian, populist, and democratic small d example
all right.
of how this works is probably Twitter, where randos like me get to voice their opinion in just a few seconds when they decide they have an opinion they want to voice. Okay, and so you could see, oh my gosh, Trump did this. This can't stand. You have to do this. There should be 17 articles of impeachment. They should have gone yesterday. Nancy Pelosi's fault for not doing it. She is going to send one today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, the pushback to that is going to be, look, we're organizing this. It's working. I'm not telling you to shut up and get on board. That's a decision you really ought to come to yourself after reading what I just said. Oh, well, we don't do that. We're Democrats. Democrats in disarray. It's like herding cats. Yada. Get with the picture here and look at the big picture and see what's going on. So there's going to be a lot of that back and forth. It's totally healthy for democracy. It's all out in public. Nobody's getting strong-armed. Nobody's going to lose their job or having a stupid opinion that doesn't agree with mine. But I'm just saying.
Okay. Sure. Well, it gives people an explanation as to why things have been the way they are, and hopefully you'll feel comfortable with it afterwards. And I guess even if you don't, it probably won't matter a great deal, even if they let you. I guess you can squawk if you like.
Don't stop squawking. Don't stop complaining. Don't stop pushing. But at least understand what's going on here.
Sure.
It's not like they're not listening to you. It's that they are. They just have a different plan for actually getting it done.
Well, so far, so good.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's been 4 days. It's not even a full week, and we still have a pandemic. What the hell's going on there?
Oh, I guess there's that, too.
So, what is going on? Well, here are the executive actions Biden will take this week.
All right.
Today, Monday, it's not only send the article of impeachment over day with a trial to start, when, February 6th or something along those lines? And by the way, the delay has been really helpful because every single day a new story comes out about what Trump tried to do to steal the election.
Right. I mean, there's a balancing act here, but there are some significant benefits from having waited.
Yeah, there are procedural stuff that you and Armando have gone over in detail, including having Chuck Schumer be the majority leader when, in fact, the articles are received.
Yes. And
they're still working out the issues of, I'm threatening to veto everything, according to Marco Rubio, but that's not going to hold because, the Democrats did win and they are going to be in the majority. And, it's going to happen. So every day, McConnell's in a diminishing picture to make demands. But in the meantime, while they organize their organization, while they organize their organizing rules, Biden is doing executive orders. So Monday, Buy American Day. This is after the flurry last week. Biden's expected to sign an executive order that directs agencies to strengthen requirements so they acquire goods and services from American businesses and workers. During the campaign, Biden pledged to make a $400 billion investment, because it's infrastructure week, guys, during his first term in federal purchases of products made by American workers. Tuesday is going to be Equity Day. Biden will sign a broad range of executive orders related to racial equity. Wednesday is Climate Day. Thursday is Healthcare Day. And Friday is Immigration Day. Well, what have you done for me lately? Well, what day of the week is it?
Yeah, well, of course, that's true. Although now we can say, well, why am I Friday? I should be Tuesday.
Well, of course he did something for you. It's a day that ends in Y. Hello, welcome to the new administration. It's different than the old administration.
Yes, Republicans rediscovering their antipathy towards executive orders all of a sudden, too.
All of a sudden, yeah.
And these are written to actually do some things, or at least I guess we could say the Biden administration, they have spokespeople who understand the actual scope of these orders, and they're not overselling what they're doing here. These are actual executive orders that will do what they say, even if it's not, it doesn't solve the problem entirely. It's a totally different.
No, but
game.
they will do what they can. Now they can't pass COVID relief by executive order, but they can at least do this. Mm-hmm. And so, what else are they doing? Well, they're going to fire the people who need to be fired that they can, and they're going to put on administrative leave the people who need to be fired that they can't.
Yes.
And so, they're also going to be working on the pandemic. So all of those things are going to happen. And, they're trying to grease the wheels and make it a little bit easier for themselves by leaking stories that say, by the time we got here, everything was like, there was nothing there. The cupboards were bare. Well, there was no vaccine. They had no plan. It's not entirely true. I mean, Fauci was there. He had a plan. So it's not like they were planless. But for the most part, functionally they were, because the whole Operation Warp Speed was set up to manufacture stuff, and even that, apparently, they got it done fast, but they didn't get it done in the quantity they were claiming. And they had zero plan to actually distribute the vaccine. In fact, they said it's not our problem as to how it gets into people's arms. That's up to the states, counties, cities, local, and your block captain. Right. It's not our problem. So, they're putting out those stories and letting people know that's in fact the case in order to buy themselves at least a little bit of time. And while that's happening, remember experts are back in fashion. Experts predicted that the vaccine was going to help. Experts predicted that the pandemic was going to get worse. Experts predicted that all the travel during Thanksgiving and Christmas were going to lead to surges. There were those surges. Those surges are now, if you pardon the expression, dying down. And so what's happening is that there are less cases now in a significant way compared to like a week ago. The worry is, number one, people will relax too much, and so they'll go right back up. And number two, the new strains, particularly the British strain that's here, and the South African strain that isn't yet but is worrisome, are going to wind up causing things to go back up if we don't get people vaccinated and if we relax. And so the idea that everything's now under control because it's better than last week is false. But it is true that things are better than last week, and we should go with that. Connecticut has a reproducibility number, RT, that's now less than 1. Oh. Once you get less than 1, it means things are getting better. If it's over 1, things are getting worse. And just about all states are starting to see an improvement, which is a very, very good thing, even though this isn't done yet. So that's the background for everything that Biden is doing. And yes, Democrats are doing this. And it's going to help them in 2022 if they actually produce and get stuff done. And no, the news is not all about Trump, even though Trump is gone. But there's so much garbage to clean up that I think that's important. And then there's one final piece here I want to do, which struck me last night when I saw it.
Okay.
And this was, I haven't given it to you yet, but I'm going to. This is from Axios, and I will give you the tweet that sparked my interest in it because it went something like this. This is talking about Kevin McCarthy and the position he's in. Remember, Kevin McCarthy is trying to defend insurrection,
yes,
defend Trump, but also get Trump out and control his party. And remember, Hans Noel may be right that the party won't split, but the party is split because there are the pro and anti-Trump factions in it right now. Yes. He's just saying that American politics is such that that party will stick together regardless because the overriding unity is to stay in power.
Yeah.
But what Kevin McCarthy is going through right now, this is from a McCarthy aide. A McCarthy aide told Axios we're eating shit for breakfast, lunch, and dinner right now. McCarthy takes heat from every direction as House Republicans, what does they say, are giving it to him from every side. Kevin McCarthy is learning you can get torched when you try to make everybody happy, especially after an insurrection. An insurrection is the proper word. You don't want to use coup? Oh, fine. It's an insurrection. It's sedition.
Okay.
You don't want to call him a traitor? It's sedition. You don't want to call it a coup? It's insurrection. Why it matters? The House Republican leader had been hoping to use this year to build toward taking the majority in 2022. Again,
Right.
he didn't care what's right or wrong, or the Constitution, or legalities, or all this other detail. The only question is he going to win, and is his party going to win? That's the only thing they care about. And of course that's their job to care about that.
Yes.
But let's never lose focus of that's why they do what they do. His efforts to bridge inter-party divisiveness over the Capitol siege has left him taking heat from every direction, eroding his stature both with the public and within his party. And I have to add, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
Yeah, or a dumber guy. He's really not up to this job, which is fine by me.
And he's going to fail because he's not up to it. I
Yeah,
mean, John
terrific.
Boehner was far more skilled than he, and Boehner couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Paul Ryan was smarter than him. Ryan couldn't do it. And McCarthy's dumb, and he can't do it either. The latest proof? McCarthy's digital director, Caleb Smith, sent a blast email to a group of GOP communication staff Saturday asking them to show their support for the boss. The subject line read, GOP new media retweet request, according to a copy of the email obtained by Axios. Smith wrote, HuffPost and the Blue Checks.
Oh,
I guess I'm
like
a Blue
they're
Check.
not.
Are you a Blue Check?
No.
I'm
You
a
are.
Blue Check.
Right.
Have been
so
out
is
in force
McCarthy.
today trying to distort Leader McCarthy's words, by accurately reporting them, I would add,
Right.
in an effort to divide America even further. That's because we're not pro-insurrection. And again, what's unity? Unity is let's all the white people stay united. They deserve to be called out. Would greatly appreciate your help in pushing back by retweeting this. And the this that they want retweeted is a tweet that says, Kevin McCarthy, from the minute the Capitol was attacked, I call for the rioters to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and have repeatedly said it's incumbent upon every person in America to help lower the temperature. That's what they wanted repeated.
Well,
They're saying, we're eating this for breakfast, lunch, and dinner right now. The aide requested anonymity to speak frankly about his boss's situation. Pressure's mounting on McCarthy financially, politically, and publicly. I mention this because sometimes you get the impression because Democrats worry about everything publicly, and Republicans are always super confident, both publicly and privately. Publicly because that's who they are, and privately because they're stupid. Okay? So it's important to understand that, no, everything isn't working for them. No. Corporate donors are freezing him out for challenging the Electoral College vote on January 6th. The media is lampooning him for initially saying the president bears responsibility, but amending it to say, I don't believe he provoked it if you listen to what he said at the rally.
Yeah, wrong.
McCarthy also got hit for saying during an interview this weekend that everybody bears responsibility because he's trying to both sides everything, like with that tweet. Meanwhile, the pro-Trump wing of his conference is angry with him for not condemning Representative Liz Cheney more forcefully. And driving the news, McCarthy explained his comments on Thursday. He also signaled limits to his support for Cheney, the conference chair and number 3 House Republican. Look, I support her, but I also have concerns. Oh, that's great. So if you're in leadership working with McCarthy, understand he will throw you under the bus in a moment.
Yes.
And he just said
He
that
has
publicly,
concerns.
so now you know that about him.
Right. Okay. So that usually works out. I support her, but
Yeah,
Okay.
Look, I support you. I'm your boss. I support you. You're the manager. I'm the owner. The manager's doing a great job.
yeah.
Manager hears that and says, uh-oh, look for another job.
I have complete confidence. Right. When Trump used to say that. Oh yeah, he has my complete confidence. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
He's fired.
Get the resume ready. Right?
Gotta
So
learn
that's
something.
the story. That's the entire story. But understand there are consequences to what the Republicans are doing. And no, things are not going swimmingly for them. And the corporate spigot that got turned off is probably the biggest factor in terms of getting their attention as to why they can't simply unite the way they want to around white supremacy, because that would be an advantage to them. They want the QAnon supporters, of course. They've always wanted them. They wanted the Tea Party people before them. But QAnon represents complete intolerance. It's pretty clear to the public who aren't QAnon that that's what's going on. And it's going to be a really, really hard sell, especially when you don't have the money to drive the message.
Okay. Man, I don't know. All right. Well, I'm glad that they're having those
so that's
problems.
why I started my segment by
Pleased
saying,
with it.
I'm getting philosophical about this. This is the background behind any individual piece of news that you hear, and you have to fit that into that framework and put it in context.
Okay. Here's some bad news in terms of developments in the things in the courts, and it might give you some idea, or maybe this is why Republicans are clinging to the still unproven idea that you can't impeach a former president, et cetera, et cetera. Word from the Supreme Court that they have decided to dismiss and moot all pending emoluments cases against Trump because, well, he's not the president anymore, so who cares? As opposed to, this was illegal, and we should point that out, and there should be some consequences for it. So there you have it. That's something we should have been telling Trump all along, that he could have avoided legal liability for some of his, or perhaps most of his, criminal activity by leaving office instead of retaining office, and that might have made things smoother on the 6th, but who knows? Apparently he didn't know that, but lots of interesting reaction to that. And I imagine Armando will have something to say about that perhaps later today or maybe even tomorrow. Whether it's on the air or not, I don't know. But lots of people commenting on this. This is roundly condemned among progressive circles as insane to do this, and an indication of how willing the Supreme Court might actually have been if any of these cases surrounding election manipulation had reached them to dismiss them after all. I guess
that's on the legal front, but on the procedural front, we got this one, which you're more than happy to try to unpack.
Oh,
GOP Senator Hawley has filed an ethics complaint against Democrats who filed an ethics complaint against him over allegations he fomented the Capitol riot.
Oh, I have to see that. Where is that?
That's Eric Watson reporting that,
okay.
And I will send that tweet over. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Sure, why not? Countersue.
Isn't the ethics committee the one that's like evenly divided?
It is, right, so they'll get nothing done on that one. But, the ethics complaint was, of course, hey, you can't foment insurrection against the Congress of the United States. That would be an ethical violation.
Hey, you can't accuse me of doing that. It's
right.
a bad thing.
It's unethical for you to tell me.
That would be a terrible thing. Therefore, you can't accuse me of it.
The only obvious response to that,
I've run
of course,
rings around you logically.
Well, until I file an ethics complaint against you for filing an ethics complaint against me for filing an ethics complaint against you. You know, it's we're now going to have the race to the top of the bat or bottom of the bat, depending on how you view things. And we'll see who files the last ethics complaint over the ethics complaint being filed. It is real interesting. Of course, I think probably the heart of his ethics complaint is that it is unethical to file a complaint against another member for speaking out, as he says, in support of what his constituents believe. But of course, now I guess the people who filed the initial ethics complaint have to do is say, my constituents wanted me to file this ethics complaint against you, and then it all falls apart.
My constituents wanted you kicked out.
Yes, right. Well, but this is all they could get. So instead we have the ethics complaint. So that'll be interesting. And I assume if you actually went and did that, it would be fun, but I don't think it would be long before he, of course, filed an ethics complaint against you for filing an ethics complaint against him for filing.
But the committee, even though it's divided, does have a chair, right?
Nah, not at the moment, if you ask me. But I guess they would have they do have a chair, and they have their own specific set of rules about what it takes to get things done. They anticipate, to some extent, tie votes, but generally speaking, they do regard a tied vote as not leading to anything. Maybe they can issue a report that maybe admonishes.
Can't they do a procedural, finding?
I'm sure
Josh
that
Hawley,
they can.
You have no ethics, therefore you have no standing to.
That could be. But on the other hand, he might then say, "Well, you have no standing to bring a charge against me in an ethics committee. What would be the point of that?"
Yeah. I have no ethics. You have no ethics. Okay.
Are you accused
and I'm telling you, senators are not exactly the brightest people in the world sometimes.
Yeah.
See Marco Rubio.
Well, that's true. Well, we'll see what the
They generally have pretty sharp staff, though, so I'm just surprised this is happening. But,
I mean, you can file
you got to quit.
it.
You got to quit loudly and say, I can't work with this guy. He has no ethics. I mean, that's the best way to take care of it.
I guess so.
And that's why, in the end, that's a small piece. But the larger piece is that's why people are saying, look, you got a QAnon problem. It's up to Republicans to fix it.
Yeah.
And since you won't, we then have to outvote. But, that's plan B. Plan A is you fix it yourself. Which they've refused to do.
Right. Well, they making excuses for it, like the fantastic Hawaii Republican organization. Well, they're really just paid. They just want the best for this country. That's all. And the best is slaughtering vampire pedophiles. So I can't fault them for I might fault them for their actions, but I can't fault them for their motivations, which is true patriotism.
Right. Jake Tapper points out with this whole ethics thing. I have a very simple question. That's because he's a journalist, right? And he asks questions.
Well, it can't be complicated.
If Hawley was so concerned about the Pennsylvania elections, did he reach out to his GOP colleague, Pat Toomey, at any time during this entire process? Anywhere.
No.
Is there any record at any time that he actually spoke to Senator Toomey about it?
No, of course not. Because, I'm sure he would say, well, Toomey, he was on his way out the door, so it wouldn't be of any help to me. And besides which, Toomey was wrong about this whole thing. I needed to step in to do the right thing.
Because if he didn't, perhaps, he really wasn't motivated by worrying about what's happening in Pennsylvania.
No, of course not. And nobody was. So, I don't know. It's certainly not surprising that he wouldn't seek any help from Pennsylvania because, of course, Pennsylvanians of responsibility knew that nothing was going on. They were just telling him,
and by the way,
save
just
your breath.
to finish out, since we're getting close to the hour here, the KC Star has a wonderful piece called Bamboozled. Hawley mentors stunned by conduct, but early warning signs were there, and goes all the way back to high school, where basically he's been a jerk since day one.
Right, and a jerk with
15.
designs on power. So, yeah, that's true. I did see that one, and I believe the pull quotes that I saw discussed on Twitter about it was that he hitched his star very early on to saying, well, the Oklahoma City bombing, probably justified, really, if you take a look at it closely enough. That should be pretty interesting. Thanks, Greg. We'll check in with you again on Wednesday.
Paywall, unfortunately, but all you got to do is have free account.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, it looks like the Kansas City Star. The piece is, behind a paywall, as Greg mentioned. And although it doesn't look like you can get in with a free account, some places have a paywall that will, well, I guess it's not a paywall if you can get in with a free account. So, no, they require some subscription. I'm not a subscriber to the Kansas City Star, and unlikely for that to happen anytime in the near future. But as I mentioned, I did see some people discussing the story, and I guess some who have access to it pulled out a few quotes, and apparently, I don't know. Hawley's not very old, so it must have been that it was back in his high school and perhaps college days when this pattern emerged with him, and it became obvious that he was kind of a do anything, say anything to get power kind of guy, and apparently some of that background included backing the Oklahoma City bombers at whatever point in history that was for him. I mean, it happened at the same time for him that it happened for the rest of us. I just don't know where he was in his development as a person or student or whatever. Not that they're different. You can be both a person and a student quite easily. But anyway, I don't know how old he was at the time. He's just not that old now. So anyway, that was rather remarkable. Of course, similar revelations about some of the other QAnon sympathetic people, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, as usual, over in the House, whose Facebook postings are now coming to more general light. I think they were pretty obvious to those of us who followed her campaign a little more closely. I mean, it wasn't, a focus of mine, but certainly Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and to some extent Madison Cawthorn came onto my radar earlier than most, i.e. before they were actually elected. But, I'm sure that there were activists down in their districts who've been tearing their hair out for months and are right now saying, of course, we were telling you this months ago. There are lots of people, of course, saying, why didn't this come to light earlier? And actually sort of looking around. I guess I should blame her Democratic opponent for not making a bigger deal out of the fact that, for instance, she has a history of posting on Facebook claiming that various school shootings, including Sandy Hook and Parkland, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, were hoaxes and or false flag operations. In one case, I think in Parkland's case, that it had been engineered by Nancy Pelosi in particular and her Democratic colleagues in an effort to raise support for their gun-grabbing agenda, which, by the way, doesn't ever seem to, really take off at any point, no matter how many of these shootings they organize. So I don't know. But they're obviously living in crazy land. But there are people down there in Georgia saying, how did you not notice this? And I don't know. The answer is there's 400 and something races going on. And if it breaks through at all that there's a QAnon Republican nominee down in that district, it gets very little attention. I mean, we saw it. I saw it. I worried about it. I've been tweeting about it. I certainly, my record on calling out Greene and Boebert as extreme dangers to the physical security of the House chamber goes back to September, I think, and pointing out, you're going to end up having to seat these people, which goes back to, I guess, one of the other criticisms I just brought up. But you're going to end up having to seat these people, and they are essentially going to be, to acknowledge their election and seat them, even though you'll be legally obligated to do so. You're going to have to start looking around at what your options are, because seating them is a slow motion assassination plot, more than simply seating someone who's going to be a strident opponent. That we're used to. What we're not used to is having them come in and actively try to coordinate the assassination of Democratic members of the House. Going to want to watch out for that. But yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene was a danger for a long time. Once Boebert won her primary, she was more obvious. But Greene, I don't know whether she won her primary earlier and was therefore the first one on the radar screen or what. I think that was probably correct chronologically. But I did see people saying, well, why didn't her Democratic opponent make a bigger deal out of this? How is it that this is only coming to our attention now? I don't know. I don't know why people really bother with that. It's quite understandable that you're not up on the details of every candidate. That's how crazies sneak through all the time. They depend on that. That's why there's a higher concentration of crazies in the state legislatures than anywhere else. There's far fewer people who give a crap about finding out that a candidate has this sort of posting history, and they can't make people outside of the district care about it until it's too late. They're an elected legislator and they do something crazy then. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, what happened? Why didn't her opponent make a bigger deal out of it? Well, her opponent didn't make a big deal out of it because her opponent had to drop out of the race after having secured the Democratic nomination, was in the race for a total of about 30 days before physical threats, death threats against him and against his family and his campaign workers caused him to eventually drop out, even though it was now, and he recognized it and he was told as much, that it was now too late for the Democratic Party in Georgia to nominate someone else to complete the cycle and at least stand for election against Greene. His name was it was locked in on the ballot. He wasn't going to get any help, certainly from the Republicans in Georgia, about replacing his name on the ballot. But he was forced by all these threats to drop out of the race and flee the state. Like, he didn't stay in Georgia until Election Day and just say, well, I'm the sacrificial lamb, but if you're a Democrat in this district, you can vote for me. He left it behind, left his name on the ballot if you were a Democrat in the district and you wouldn't consider there's no way you're going to consider voting for Green and didn't want to leave it blank. There was a name there to check off, but he didn't stay and campaign and even hold out the promise of electing representing the district in place of Marjorie Taylor Greene should the election be handed to him, because he was gone. I mean, the threats and the stress of the thing, I mean, it broke up his family, it broke up his marriage, he left his house, I mean, he fled the state with nothing. And I guess we were just so distracted by everything else because Trump made it literally impossible to just simply survive from, under his administration until Election Day, unless you locked yourself up in the house, which was what you should have been doing anyway. But I mean, it was literally at that point you had to stay home and not do anything and not interact with people if you wanted not to be sick and possibly die before Election Day. And so, yeah, we ended up not noticing. I mean, it happened, and I think we probably took note of it at some point on the show that this, I don't know, but it certainly wasn't even a huge topic of discussion on the show. It just couldn't be. Lauren Boebert, I think once she won her primary, which was a big surprise, because I think she unseated a incumbent Republican there, and I don't think Green did. I think Green sort of moved into an open seat district, heavily Republican, but I think the Republican there was not running for re-election, was a term limits believer, I think, and was just retiring instead. And she didn't, as I understand it, by the way, she didn't live in the district. She rented a condo there so that she could establish residency. She may have lived just one district over or something like that, but she was a nightmare from the beginning. But in terms of people saying, well, why didn't this come to light earlier? Well, because she was a terrorist earlier, and she threatened to kill anybody who allowed it to come to light. So I guess you can maybe understand that. Anyway, yes, so that's on our plate. We could certainly discuss that. We could shift over to what's going on in the Supreme Court, as I mentioned, to Mike Musson commenting on that one, saying, excellent. So the Supreme Court emoluments logic means that a murder charge should be mooted once the victim is dead. Well, obviously not, because those are just regular low-class people who are murdering others. And whereas if you shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue in a high-class murder, yes, then the case should be mooted. Well, there you have it. Let's see. Walter Schaub, the government ethics, former government ethics official, and now just sort of official man about town when it comes to decrying the ethics of the Trump administration, says, of course, this whole thing is insane. Zoe Tillman, Zoe, I don't know how she says it, but Zoe Tillman, senior reporter at BuzzFeed News, covering the courts, had the initial word on this one, saying, the SCOTUS has booted the remaining emoluments cases against Trump as moot and vacated the judgments of against the former president, that would be Trump, in the lower courts, which seems an extraordinarily aggressive approach to things. But here's the write-up. Let's see. There was the Trump versus Crew, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. That suit thrown out here. The motion of scholar Seth Barrett Tillman et al. For leave to file a brief as amici curiae is granted. The motion of Professor Lawrence A. Hammermesh for leave to file a brief is granted. So these are all interesting. Where's the dismissal part? The petition for a writ of certiorari is granted. The judgment is vacated, and the case is remanded to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit with instructions to dismiss the case as moot. So I guess, all right, you can file your brief, but the case is going to be mooted. Similarly, the Trump versus the District of Columbia case, in which the same experts were involved, but also remanded this time to the Fourth Circuit to dismiss as moot as well. So interesting. We'll follow up on exactly what, perhaps we'll follow up. Maybe it ends up being one of the lesser stories and falling by the wayside, given that we're also dealing with so many other constitutional crises at the same time. Schaub saying this is insane. These cases are not moot. He still has the money. When any other federal employee violates the emoluments clause, they have to forfeit the money. I mean, it really is ridiculous. It's a good point, obviously. It just shouldn't make any difference that he's now out of office. It is a crazy thing to say that the case ought to be mooted because he's gotten away with it now. I don't know what their thinking is, but maybe we can dive into it sometime in the future. Maybe it's something that Armando's paying attention to. But again, it could be just one of 1,000 things happening at any given moment, and we're just not going to be able to get to it after all. All right. Well, an incoming phone call from Arlington, Virginia, so I guess we ought to take that, right? Maybe it's people working remotely on the Supreme Court's decisions and faxing them out and listening to the show and saying, I'll call in on a line that isn't connected in any way whatsoever to the broadcast of the show and explain everything. Probably not. All right. Well, lots more to get to here. Let me see. I'll run through what's in Pocket. I had a list of items, short items that I wanted to make sure we mentioned. I think we got to most of those with Greg. I guess, top of the news, and for those of you wondering, the Biden's dogs have, in fact, finally arrived at the White House. I know that was important to a lot of people, and they were wondering, where are the dogs? Because it was a historical moment. Apparently, these would be, I think, they were being touted as the first rescue dogs to be, I don't know, do people bother calling them the first dogs or anything like that? That's kind of stupid, but, we're into inflating titles these days. That actually was a topic of conversation here at home the other day about, as they were puzzling over what to call Kamala Harris's husband. What's Doug's last name? I'm just trying to think. I think I've got it in my head, but I'm like, do I have that right or do I have it wrong? Let's see. Just checking things out here. Yeah, I don't think I remember his name correctly. So I remember that it was Doug, and I guess that's probably ahead of the game in terms of. I think by now I should have known it. Emhoff, right? Emhoff is his name. I was confused. I'm like, Elmendorf. No, he's somebody else. Completely different guy. But okay. Anyway, the struggles over what to call him formally. And I think they've settled on, it wasn't that much of a struggle. Second gentleman, which, okay. I mean, I guess that's the logical place to land. Although, I've always found it weird that they ever bothered to call the spouse of the vice president the second anything. I understand, I guess, the logic of landing on it, given that we had traditionally called the spouse of the president, and as we have not yet had a woman president, we've always called the spouse of the president the first lady. Or in cases where there was no spouse, we called someone else. Someone else had to fill in the role of first lady, but I don't think they called them first lady, but maybe sort of like hostess of, I don't remember, it's happened a couple of times. But not typically viewed as an extraordinarily important item in the news. But it's weird. We've settled on calling spouses of the vice president's first or second lady, or now second gentleman, and I don't think that's really, doesn't really make any sense. I guess it was more like a tongue-in-cheek label for them than anything else, and then it just sort of began being taken seriously. I don't know, it reminded me very much of during the Bush administration, where at some point, I guess because of the militarized atmosphere in general and inside the Bush administration, given what they were doing with the global war on terror, et cetera, that members of Congress in questioning Attorney General Alberto Gonzales when he would make regular, oversight appearances on Capitol Hill. And they began referring to him as General Gonzales. Do you remember this? This was really outrageous, as though he were, a military figure. And like they had no understanding that, I don't know what part of speech it would be, but general isn't his rank. He's the Attorney General, yes, and if anything, the way to address him is Mr. Attorney General, not General Gonzales. General describes the charge of his duties. He's the attorney-in-chief, sort of, and his purview is the general oversight of law enforcement in the United States. It's not making him a general in the army or anything like that, but they kept insisting on it. And then I guess even some Democrats who heard Republicans referring to him that way, I guess, were unsure of themselves afterwards. Oh, maybe I'm doing it wrong. I should be referring to him as General Gonzales. And they started doing it. I guess I can't blame them too much, because it happens to me, right here on the radio. Oh, yeah, I doubt myself and my own recollection of things, but well, that one I knew, and I wouldn't have made that mistake. I just found that very odd. And that and the second lady thing, and as it happens, there's another example that cropped up. But, anyway, I guess I'll drop that one for the time being. But I don't know that we need to worry about calling the spouse of the vice president second anything. And I don't think that it was ever intended to be the case. But, okay. There we have it. Anyway, so now where were we? We're back on the dogs. Are they first dogs? I guess they are. But they were the first rescue dogs, apparently, to make it to that. Although my assumption is that somewhere in the distant past, before we made distinctions about such things, because there wasn't such a thing as a rescue dog. Dogs were just dogs, and I'm sure you could buy dogs from breeders since forever. But everybody else, it's like, did you get your dog from the dog pound? Okay, or just not buy it from a breeder. They're kind of, I guess, rescue-ish dogs. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a president prior that actually had what would pass for a rescue dog now, but nobody thought to make a big deal out of it, or even bother to report that the president had a dog, for that matter. There was a time when that didn't make a difference either. But there you have it. So that's the news on the presidential dogs. On the COVID front, there's news as well, including this. This I hadn't planned on necessarily spending any time on, but the COVID-delayed Olympics, which I guess had been scheduled for 2020, obviously, and they pushed back to 2021 in the hopes they might be able to salvage the games. They were to be hosted in Japan. And apparently that's now off too. They're basically saying, even the delayed 2020 Olympics pushed into 2021, we're simply going to have to cancel. We just simply aren't going to be in a safe spot by the time that rolls around. And then once you get to 2022, you're halfway into the next Olympic training cycle anyway. So maybe they'll just skip it this time and have the 2024 Olympics as scheduled. Japan, I'm sure, feeling shortchanged in all of this, even though lately when they've been held in westernized capitalist countries, the Olympics sometimes end up being a money loser for the jurisdiction that's holding them. But I'm sure they've refined things now and have figured out how to squeeze money out of it. So I guess Japan loses out on that. They want to get back into the race and host the Olympics sometime in the next availability in the 2030s, somewhere along the line. But the Hill is reporting it. I'm sure there are sources closer to the subject. They're borrowing from Reuters reporting here. But Japan, unlikely to achieve herd immunity. That would be, of course, induced herd immunity through the vaccine, but unlikely to reach that stage from any time close to the summer scheduled start time for the Olympics, and so they'll just have to push forward. So bad news there, and we'll see where that leads. Oh, you know what? That does lead me to think a bit about, because of the mention of the Olympics. So we'll do this sort of stream of consciousness style, since I guess we're still going to have to wait a little while to find out news of the transmission of the articles of impeachment from the House over to the Senate. And even then, nothing in particular scheduled to happen right away. Unless you want to think back to when Politico told you that the trial was absolutely positively going to start, because the only way it could be delayed at all in any way was through unanimous consent, and they were never going to get unanimous consent, that trial was going to start at 1 p.m. on January 20th, and they're still wrong about that, and it's not going to change because that date is in the past now and it's locked in. But anyway, another story out there at play, and I don't know, did I park it anywhere here? I think I might not have put it aside because I felt like we had made some mention of the story anyway previously, but I guess other people coming to understand, yeah, and I think I know where I can go and find the story anyway, because I don't think I parked it anywhere, was just as details were coming to light about just how bad Marjorie Taylor Greene is, and Lauren Boebert, her background also coming to light, and some of the things that I don't know if we ever got to mention. Oh, we must have mentioned at least one of the things. But she's got a criminal record of some sort, a rap sheet in her background, and her husband too. Apparently her husband, I don't know the particulars of it, but I know we must have made mention on the show that he, on his criminal background, has got something about exposing himself to a minor at some point. And I don't know whether we ever tried to puzzle out how that might have happened in an innocent way, let's say. But that one would ordinarily be tough to live down, but I guess it just goes to show you what it's like to run in some of these heavily Republican districts. You can have a criminal background. Your husband can have a criminal background. You can run as a QAnon supporter and touting your specific qualifications as a gun nut for going to Washington and taking on the fight against the cannibal vampire pedophiles when your husband has been convicted of exposing himself to a minor, and everybody says, well, yeah, but sure. But that's different. He wasn't also going to drink their blood and keep them in a dungeon and mine adrenochrome from them. So I guess it's okay. He just wanted to have a little bit of fun pulling his pants down in front of kids. All right. So, whatever it is, we can excuse it. Anyway, similarly, Madison Cawthorn, I don't know whether we ever discussed it on the air or not. It's hard to tell what made it to the air and what didn't, just in terms of the things I read during the election cycle. But he certainly came to my attention as a person who also had some difficulty as a bit of a fabulist. I think we might have talked about the weird situation surrounding his lawsuit over the car accident that he was involved in, and that apparently he tried to perpetrate some sort of fraud on the courts in order to get a payoff from insurance, but also, wanting a payoff from insurance from his friend's insurer who was driving the car, and there was all sorts of strange machinations going on there. But we also learned, and he did anyway, and I don't know whether we got to share it, about how many other things he was not quite telling the truth about, if not outright lying about, including the fact that he appears to have campaigned very coyly in a way that led many of the voters of the district to believe that his basic biography was that he was bound for the Naval Academy in Annapolis when tragedy struck and when he was involved in this car accident, and that sort of derailed his life, but that he had been admitted to the academy at Annapolis and had to change his plans after his accident, when in fact it was the case that though he had made an application to the academy, he had outright been rejected from it, and there was no opportunity available to him to attend the academy at all. But I guess in applying, at some point, perhaps you are permitted to come to the academy during a summer session and participate in physical training with other aspiring applicants. And that he did that, and he took some pictures of himself with Navy sweatshirts on and going through these drills or whatever. And that became a substitute for his having been actually, admitted to the academy. Anyway, then he went on to, I think, do a semester at Patrick Henry College, where he was accused by some of the other students there at the time of being something of a sexual harasser and stalker as well. But at any rate, yes, he seems to have had a fabulous past for himself as well. And this too, only now sort of coming to more general light. We'll move on after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, now I remember what I was thinking about Madison Cawthorn that I wanted to bring to light. In particular, a different strain of his fabulism that I had read over the weekend that I thought was particularly interesting. They made a particularly good point, and I don't think we have to go all the way through the entirety of the article to get the point across, but it was an important and slightly different problem. That I mentioned the delay of the Olympics in Japan, and that's why that's what made me think about this again. This written up in The Nation magazine, although of course we see it online. Sarah Luderman, this piece, which I said I initially didn't park in Pocket because I sort of felt like we've covered or had at least hinted at the fabulous career of Madison Cawthorn. But The Ignominious Deceits of Congressman Cawthorn is the name of this piece in The Nation. Representative Madison Cawthorn has misled the public about training for the Paralympics, just as he misrepresented his education and business history. And so Sarah gives you a pretty good rundown of what his claims were with regard to education and business. And I know that at least one of the other articles also that I've read, whether we read them on the air or not, discussed his gun affinity, which also is the subject of some fabulous exaggeration as well. One of the more widely circulated pictures of him for his campaign with his claim of being an avid hunter, which is, I'm sure difficult to do in a wheelchair. But here he is pictured talking about his, this was the picture that accompanied his claims about hunting. It was taken in the woods, so that's supposed to mean I'm a hunter. But that others had pointed out that he's proudly posing with, some sort of tactical gear with a handgun holster strapped to his chest. And of course, that wouldn't really indicate any sort of hunting acumen either. But he's got a rifle sort of over his shoulder with a big scope on it. And it's a big, scary-looking sort of black rifle with a gigantic scope that makes you think, wow, he's a very serious shooter, and he's in the woods, and he says he's an avid hunter, so this must be true. Here's a big gun. Here's some woods. He says he's a hunter. I don't know how he hunts in a wheelchair. Maybe he's talking about how he used to hunt before he was in a wheelchair. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Whatever. Who cares? He's a hunter. But the other article that I had read pointing out, or other commenters on Twitter pointing out, yeah, that's the type of gun that is a very specific sort of range shooting competition rifle. It might mean you're an excellent shot or that you participate in that sort of riflery, but it's not a gun you would ever use for hunting under any circumstances. At least that was the claim. I mean, I couldn't tell you whether that's true or not. I just thought that was sort of an interesting note alongside of it, and people basically saying, yeah, he's not a hunter. He doesn't have a hunting license and never has, and that's not a hunting weapon, and the fact that he's posing in the woods with a dog doesn't mean anything. So anyway, just thought I'd point that out. But this story makes another interesting sort of point. Before January 6th, 25-year-old Representative Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina, of course, was known for being the youngest member of Congress, an ardent Trump supporter, and one of the few wheelchair users in elected office. Now he is in the headlines for giving a speech at the Stop the Steal rally, the so-called Stop the Steal rally, prior to the insurrection at the Capitol that left 5 people dead. Throughout his short but meteoric political career, Cawthorn has used his disability to tell a story of overcoming. Despite great adversity, he claims to have achieved excellence through grit and physical strength. Many of his campaign ads featured images of Cawthorn intubated and hospitalized alongside videos of him lifting weights and hurtling forward in a racing wheelchair, but his claims of sporting success, like his accounts of education and business acumen, have often been misleading. Cawthorn became disabled after a 2014 car crash left him paralyzed from the waist down. By Cawthorn's own telling, he was a successful business owner, headed to the Naval Academy before his injury tragically reordered his life. As it turns out, neither claim is true. The Asheville Watchdog reported that Cawthorn had already been rejected from the Naval Academy before his accident, and Cawthorn's real estate investment firm, SPQR Holdings, LLC, and I think we all recognize, maybe not, maybe we all recognize the lettering there, but very specific meaning attached to that. And anyways, SPQR Holdings, LLC, which he formed in August of 2019, reported no income on its tax documents, and Cawthorn was the sole employee, so not much of a business career there. But he has not only styled himself as Naval Academy material with a head for real estate, multiple outlets reported that before he ran for office, Cawthorn was training for the 2020 Paralympic Games. There is little detail, but according to Micah Bach, Cawthorn's campaign communications director, he intended to compete in the 400-meter dash at the 2020 Paralympic Games in Tokyo. Of course, those not going to be taking place after all, but it would have been an incredible footnote in a politician's biography. Paralympians are celebrated and accomplished athletes. But his hopes for the Paralympic Games, now slated for summer of 2021, which we're also not going to have, were allegedly dashed by his worsening disability. Not just COVID, I guess. Cawthorn frequently said on social media that he was training, as he said, for the Paralympic Games. Technically, such a statement could be true, but only in the sense that I could be training for the Olympic Games. It's like a kid saying they want to play in the NBA when they're on their 4th grade basketball team, said Amanda McRory, a 3-time Paralympian who has earned 7 medals in track and field. Cawthorn stated on the Christian inspirational podcast The Heel that, quote, I had an opportunity for the Paralympics for track and field. He did not have that opportunity, nor does it appear he took any meaningful steps that would have led him there. And this is where the story really becomes interesting. Like, how do we know this, right? Paralympians are, of course, the best at what they do. Qualifying is a long, complicated process. In addition to being a Paralympian, McGrory is the archivist and collections curator of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. She told me, you have to be involved in a team, usually your college or a local club, and then from there you establish times at qualifying races, and from there you get scouted. Patrick Henry College, which Cawthorn attended for a semester before dropping out, doesn't have a disabled sports program. Not surprising if you know anything about Patrick Henry College. I mean, smallish operation, so it would be difficult for them to do it anyway, and probably very few colleges of that size or anything near that size have disabled sports programs. But anyway, he was only there for a semester. But yes, good point here. It's not just, you don't just say, well, I'm going to try out. It doesn't really work like that. And that concept is developed a little bit further in this story here, including a very good point towards the end, which is really what I'm reading this for. But it's also a good way to bash Madison Cawthorn. In addition to not being on a team, Cawthorn does not appear to have competed in any qualifying races. Robert Kozarek, a former elite wheelchair marathoner, said he would have met Cawthorn at some point if he had been serious competition. Now, this is a marathoner, and it's not necessarily the case that among Olympic athletes that the marathoners would have met the 400-meter runners necessarily, even if they were members of the United States Olympic track and field team. Though, you know, the chances are pretty good that they might have met, but it's not necessarily the case. But well, we'll read on and find out why he says this. Now, Kozarek himself never qualified for the Paralympic Games. He's an elite wheelchair marathoner, but never went to the Paralympic Games. The community, though, he says, the community itself is small. There's probably 50 elite wheelchair racers in the entire country. And we see each other 4, 5, 6 times a year, at least. It is kind of a small community, even as between the marathoners and the sprinters. Interesting. In addition to being on a team and establishing time at qualifying races, prospective Paralympians need to be internationally classified. The International Paralympic Committee, or IPC, has a registry of athletes. You have to be on it to even compete internationally, McGrory explained. People on the list are evaluated for severity of disability and sorted accordingly in an attempt to make athletic competition between people with different disabilities fairer. The list is publicly available and contains over 4,000 athletes from around the world. Cawthorn isn't on it. Brian Seaman, however, is on the list. He represented Team USA in track and field in the 2012 and 2016 Paralympic Games. I'm still training for 2021, Seaman told me during our interview. Seaman, like Cawthorn, uses a wheelchair. He is passionate about athletic competition for disabled people. I truly believe in the power of sports in helping people realize that even though you have a disability, you are capable and there are opportunities and outlets for you. I never want to make someone feel like it's impossible. But what Cawthorn said on social media about his Paralympic training was often impossible, according to Seaman, McGrory, and multiple other former and current Paralympians. For example, in one post from May 2019, Cawthorn uses the hashtag qualifiers. In another post from February 2019, Cawthorn mentions that he is going to the U.S. Open in June. But McGrory told me there were no qualifying meets in 2019. Both she and Seaman have no idea what the U.S. Open in Cawthorn's post could possibly refer to. I guess they just thought everybody figured, well, they probably call the qualifying meet the U.S. Open Track and Field Paralympic Championships or something like that, like they do in every other sport. But nope, not what they call it. McGrory remembered the first video she saw in which Cawthorn claims he is going to break the world record for the 100-meter dash. Now, remember, he was going for the 400, but I'm going to break the world record for the 100-meter dash, he says in this video, while using what is essentially a wheelchair treadmill. He says to the camera, while panting through his exercises, 13.76. To most of you, it's just a number. But for me, it's all I can think about. 13.76 seconds is the world record for the 100-meter dash. So in Tokyo, August 2020, that world record's going down. McGrory recalled what she'd thought at the time. Who is this guy? Why does he think he's going to break the world record? This is really weird. I don't think he has any idea what he's talking about. Seaman admitted a little sheepishly that he and other elite athletes were aware of Cawthorn long before he ran for office. In fact, Cawthorn's Instagram feed was a bit of a running joke. My teammates and I would share whatever posts Cawthorn put up and be like, look at what that bat crap thing he said about the Paralympics this week. They didn't say bat crap, obviously. These claims he was making were just so absurd, you have to find some humor in it. So you see, they're a little sheepish about it because, like I said, as disabled athletes, they don't want to crush anybody's dream or anything, or let anybody know that, serious Paralympians who are in actual training are looking at, your aspirational Instagram messages and laughing at you. That's not the case if you're actually doing the serious work of training. But I guess if you're just telling everybody, I'm going to break the world records while you're running on a treadmill, I guess that could get passed around. Anyway, there is one real identifiable race that Cawthorn name drops on Instagram, the Peachtree Road Race in Atlanta, which he described as, quote, the biggest 10K in the world, which I anticipated to win. It does bill itself as the world's largest 10K, but Cawthorn was not likely to win. Multiple elite racers were slated to compete, including Daniel Romanchuk, I don't know how he pronounces it, Romanchuk perhaps, who holds the world record for the fastest wheelchair marathon in history. According to Seaman, Romanchuk is arguably the fastest man in the world, so he was going to be there, but Madison Cawthorn was going to beat him. Whether he's training for the 100-meter dash he's going to break that world record, he's going to win the 10K, he's going to compete in the 400, he's just an all-around elite athlete, apparently. Despite attracting elite racers, Peachtree is a relaxed affair and is no way considered a qualifier for the U.S. Paralympic Games. It's a turkey trot kind of thing, explained Seaman, who has raced Peachtree multiple times. People get up in the morning, you run your contest, and then it's the 4th of July. There's no qualifications. If you want to sign up, you can sign up. The Peachtree Road Race is significant because the Shepherd Center, a rehabilitation hospital in Atlanta, partners with the race to coordinate the logistics for the wheelchair division. The Shepherd Center primarily supports people with newly acquired spinal cord injuries, some of whom have gone on to become Paralympians. People essentially learn the basics of how to be a person with a disability at the Shepherd Center, Seaman told me. Halfway through the Peachtree Road Race, after what Seaman called Cardiac Hill, the route passes the Shepherd Center. What's really cool is that Shepherd Center staff bring a bunch of younger patients out to cheer you on. It's a great opportunity for them to see what's possible if you work hard and train, he said. Multiple athletes expressed frustration, not just with Cawthorn, but with the general ignorance of disability and athletics. And this is really the point I wanted to get to with this. But it kind of had to be set up first. This is what made me agree that this was actually worth some time on the show today. Multiple athletes expressed frustration, not just with Cawthorn, but with the general ignorance of disability and athletics. If Cawthorn had claimed to be preparing for the 400 meters in the Summer Olympics, the standard Summer Olympics, the press would have ridiculed him. But no one in media questioned his claims of training for the Paralympics. And I guess I'd be guilty of that too if I had been aware of it earlier. I'm sure I would have said, well, I don't know anything about it. He could be training for the Paralympics, but no. But there is such a lack of awareness about the Paralympic movement, Seaman said, that people don't understand the time and effort and energy that Paralympic athletes put into their training. It's an elite sport. You can't just get in a racing chair. That's really not how it works. And that's actually the conclusion of the article. That's the big point. But I really felt like rather than skipping to that point, you really needed to build up to it because it is an excellent point and something that we should be, spend some time on a show like this one, even though it's not, breaking news that's got anything to do with, certainly got nothing to do with procedure or even necessarily directly with the politics, but a great point that not only is Madison Cawthorn making things up about his background and on that basis serving in Congress, which is a troublesome prospect to be sure, but that he's doing so in a way that exploits a weakness, a weak spot, another one, among the press and the general public. And because it's a problem among the general public, I bring it up. True for disability, the disability community, and for advocates and allies, this is probably a tremendously important point. That this only worked as a claim because we're all kind of ignorant about the this part of the suite of issues are surrounding disability, but in particular Paralympics and the Paralympic movement, that somehow we think, well, he's disabled and he's athletic, so maybe the Paralympics is something that he really aspires to and can get to. And, you know, not to crush anybody's dream or anything, but making it to the Paralympics aren't just like, well, if you can't make it because you have a disability, well, you know, we'll let anybody compete and everybody gets a trophy. It's a serious thing with you have to dedicate your life to it, just like regular Olympic athletes do too. Or I don't know what's a good terminology, the standard Olympics. I don't want to, lessen anything about the achievement or competition in the Paralympics, but it's because it's the same sort of, you gotta like dedicate your life to it. You pick where you live in the country based on the fact that you need to be here, there, or somewhere else for access to the elite training program that gets you all the way to the Paralympics, just like the Olympics. And if anybody had given a moment's thought to the issues of this portion of the disability issue suite, we would have known right away. The athletes knew right away. Probably everybody who's ever, even competed just for fun in disability sports would know right away too. And we don't. And that's a part of the problem. So I thought I would spend some time on it, though it's not directly electoral political or procedural political. Well worth our time. Plus, it's another shot at Madison Cawthorn, which can never be a waste of time. All right, let's see. Other items that we had parked in pocket. So we'll get to some of the other top stories that I meant to bring you for the day. Let's see. J.J. McNabb giving us a little warning flag for events upcoming, saying this morning or last night in tweeting, I know you're all sick of the Bundy clan, sick of Bundy, but there's news. The Nevada, as they say, Independent, reporting this in the opinion section here, but the tweet that goes along with the article says, Bundy, I guess we're back to Cliven Bundy here, the patriarch, if you will, has promised in a repeat of the 2014 standoff that if they try to take his trespassing cows again, you all know the background story for the Bundys, right? Letting their cows graze on federal property without permits. If they try to take his trespassing cows again, or enforce the penalties that courts have ordered him to pay, he'll be ready to resist again, I guess, and do the same thing all over again. So what should the Biden administration do about this? The question is asked, and I guess answered in an opinion piece in the Nevada Independent by James R. Skillen. I'm not certain what he recommends here, but you can check that out perhaps on your own time if you're interested in seeing what others are recommending for this, besides the randos on Twitter who just say, take the cows, or shoot the cows, or eat the cows, or shoot Bundy, or eat Bundy, or whatever else they might be suggesting out there. But I guess we're getting ready for more of the same, and in many ways lots of reruns about of the Obama administration. I guess they figure they'll just run the same plays against Biden, and we'll see whether you're able to do anything differently this time around. We haven't got too much time here. Anything else that we want to throw in here? We mentioned there's lots of good reading. Another follow-up report from the New York Times on Jeffrey Clark, the mid-level, mid to high level, but not top-level presidential conferencing kind of guy over at the Department of Justice, who Trump had identified for him by, is it Scott Perry? Is that his name? From Pennsylvania, congressman who apparently introduced the two of them and put word in Trump's ear that if he fired everybody who outranked Jeffrey Clark and made Jeffrey Clark the acting attorney general, he would do his bidding with the Georgia election and trying to overturn the results of the entire November election. So New York Times, following up on their reporting, which I think led the story over the weekend about what Clark was up to, this piece entitled "Jeffrey Clark was considered unassuming, then he plotted with Trump." So a little bit more information about who he is and where he came from. He, I think, at some point in the last couple of years, took charge, perhaps as acting head of the environmental law division over at DOJ, and then got bumped up again, I think, through his Federalist Society connections. And apparently that's a large part of the thread going through today's article, is his Federalist Society connections got him named acting head of the Justice Department's Civil Division as well, which is a much bigger, a much more important division than, at least in terms of internal prestige and caseload, than the environmental law section, which might stand to regain some of its prestige under an administration like Biden's that at least believes in science and thinks of the environment as a serious problem. So anyway, more information about him. The basics that you may not have heard, even though you heard the basics of the story of how he got involved with Trump, is that most Justice Department alums will tell you that a person in his position would never be speaking directly to the president about anything, certainly not without the direct knowledge of his superiors. And the idea that he went around the acting attorney general and offered himself up, and if you read this weekend's stories, apparently came back to Rosen quite assured that he would be replacing Rosen as acting attorney general. And he was offering Rosen, well, you can stay on at DOJ as my direct report instead of vice versa. Said something really quite amazing. But yeah, apparently just the fact that Trump was talking directly to him is evidence on its face that there was improper interference in the Justice Department's operations, never mind what they actually talked about. So that's an interesting development. And let's see. Besides that, I guess I can also float for your reading. Well, maybe we'll save this one for another day when we can read a little bit more of it. But just in case we don't, Stat News back on my radar, this time with an article that they won't show me the title to anymore because they have a pop-up ad in the way, and the ad never showed up. Just blank space now covering up. Undercounting of COVID-19 deaths is greatest, you'll never guess where, in pro-Trump areas, analysis shows. And it must have been a difficult analysis because as it stands, the count of COVID-19 deaths in terms of raw numbers is probably greatest in pro-Trump areas because they won't wear masks and they don't believe in science. And as a result, they're getting killed by COVID-19, or at least laid low by COVID-19 at rates far exceeding elsewhere. But I guess it's happening at rates even farther exceeding elsewhere than we first knew, because they're also undercounting and still beating the pants off of everybody else with this. So very interesting, and it jives a little bit with another piece that I put aside about worries about the effectiveness of the vaccine in the face of this undercount and in the face of the expected prevalence by early spring in this country of the British strain. And I didn't even know about the South African strain, but that it may be the case that in a place like North Dakota, where the official numbers tell us that 1 in every 8 or so of North Dakotans, and now approaching the same number for South Dakotans, have been infected by the virus, about 12.5% infection rate there, that in reality, some scientists believe that the true rate is actually closer to, believe it or not, 60%, which actually gets them finally, maybe they'll end up saying, aha, see, we told you we were right, might actually begin to put them in herd immunity territory. But it also means that the effectiveness of the vaccine that's being administered there might be less than expected. But at any rate, so that would jive, right? If they've been undercounting deaths and infection rates in places like this, we'd need to know that. And of course, it might have some serious impact on policy too. Like if you were shipping X amount of vaccine to the Dakotas thinking that they were in trouble and really needed it, but in fact most people had already had the infection anyway, maybe that vaccine would be better used elsewhere. I don't know. We'd have to leave that for the epidemiologists to sort out. We got to take off for the rest of the day, of course. We'll be back tomorrow, and we've got the balance of the week to discuss the impeachment. Those developments will be reported on later today, and we can recap them tomorrow. And in the meantime, Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. What's he got on tap? More about Kevin McCarthy. We're going to need to know more about him and what he's up to. A federal judge in Alabama gave 5 years probation to a white ex-cop who admitted obstructing investigators on charges he beat a black driver. More of the same there. And, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell in the news. Let's find out why.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yeah, Beryl Howell is a judge we've heard about before in a number of cases. Well, he's set aside, you know what, I don't even know now to think about it. Set aside a lower court order and blocked the release of one of these zip-tie DC insurgents. So some of those cases are getting turned around as well. Now I'll have to refamiliarize myself with Beryl Howell for tomorrow. See you next time.